So section C, you've got to answer question 3, and then either question 4, which is about food, so we won't answer that one. Question 5 about water, which is our section, and question 6 is about energy. So we'll start with question 3. Study figure 9, a map showing the world's 10 happiest populations and 10 unhappiest in 2015. The question, what is the difference in score between the happiest and unhappiest population? So the happiest is Switzerland, 7.59. The unhappiest is Togo, 2.84. So you'll take that number away from the Switzerland one and you'll get the answer of 4.75. 3.2, using figure 9 and your own knowledge, explain how inequalities in the supply of resources influence social well-being. So basically, we've got to use the figure and explain how this with inequalities. So basically, how the supply of resources is so unequal influences the happiness, basically, of people. So if we look up at the figure, what have we got to help us in our answer? We've got place names, we've got numbers, so let's make sure we use them. Particularly, let's focus on the countries that are unhappy. So there's a lot of countries like Chad, Togo, the most unhappy, Ivory Coast. Now, all these countries are called sub-Saharan because you've got the Sahara Desert here and they are sort of just below it. So sub-Saharan countries. So we need to sort of reference those in our answer. So sub-Saharan countries like Togo and Chad are the most unhappy. We can give the figure as well. And then we need to explain why this is. So, for instance, these people are obviously unhappy because they can't access resources. For instance, food might be of short supply. If you don't have food, then you'll become undernourished or have a calorie deficit, which could lead to unhappiness. Also, you could talk about the supply of water as well. So if you don't get clean water, you've got to walk a long way to get it, therefore missing out on school and things like that. Or you might be forced to drink dirty water, and then you can link in diseases like cholera. Or maybe if you've got lots of standing dirty water in your country, then you might have a big problem with malaria that kills 1 million people in Africa every year. So as long as you give the reference to the source and explain some of those points, you should be getting 3 marks. 2.3, outline one opportunity created by the changing demand for food in the UK. 2-mark question. You just got to try and develop 1 point, as the question suggests. So basically, how has our demand for food changed in the UK? Well, first of all, we don't just want to eat seasonal food now. We want to have a variety of food available all year round. So I guess an opportunity for somebody would be from farmers abroad, because we are now importing food in from all around the world because customers or consumers demand that variety. But you could also talk about more recently, people have become aware of food miles. That's the distance the food travels. So a lot of people, as a result of that, want to buy more local food or food grown in Britain. So this could be an opportunity for local farmers. Or finally, there's been a lot of concerns over the use of chemicals and pesticides on crops. So one opportunity could be for farmers of organic foods as well. As long as you develop just one of those points using phrases like which means that, should be full marks. 2.4, using figure 10 and your own understanding, suggest how the proposed water transfer schemes will help meet the changing demand for water in the UK. About 6 minutes worth of writing then. So what we need to do is we need to use reference the figure and a bit of our own understanding to basically say how good is it going to be to transfer water from one part of the country to another. So here is our figure. Got a map of Britain. We've got the red lines that represent where water might be travelling across the country. So to places like, from places like the north or Wales to the southeast. So we need to use some of these place names. We could use some of the statistics about the population growth in London and in Oxford. We could also use compass points to reference places, for example, the north of England. Or we could also use the scale at the bottom to maybe suggest how far some of these transfers are going to be. Now, there's a couple of key terms that we need to include. We know, for one, that in the south of England, there's lots of people. So we can say there is a high population density, basically lots of people living in a very small area. We also know that in the southeast England, they don't get too much rain. So as a result, they are in what's called water deficit. They don't really have enough water to sustain all these people. In the north of England, it's the complete opposite. Not too many people live there, so this is what we call sparsely populated, but they also have lots and lots of rainfall, so they have a water surplus. Now, we could say this is a really good thing to happen, because obviously there's not going to be a need for water in the north. However, we can suggest that by building these pipes, it's going to maybe scar the environment, and maybe people might have to be moved or displaced. Water might need energy to be pumped from the north to the south. It's going to require energy, so there might be some greenhouse gas emissions given off. So we need to sort of say all that, and then eventually you might need to go into a little bit of detail and say, well, okay, the south can get water to it from areas like Wales or the north of England, but that won't solve the problem entirely. And what might also help is if people in places like London and Oxford conserve water by maybe having a water butt, or maybe having showers instead of baths, maybe reusing water, grey water, for instance. So to get full marks here, I'd suggest not only using the figure, but also sort of evaluating slightly that you don't just need to have water, you also need to conserve it. If you do so, the water will go a lot further. 5. Name one Asian or Middle Eastern country with extreme water scarcity projected in 2025. So we've got this figure. It's an extremely easy question, this one. Just got to know where either Asia or the Middle East is. So Asia is this continent here, including countries like India and China, etc. The Middle East is this bit here. So it's just to the east in the middle of the map, hence its name. So just got to pick out one of these red countries, for instance, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, etc. The only way you can really go wrong is if you start picking African countries like Libya, Morocco, Niger. So it's got to be one of these. Next question, 5.2, sort of split into two parts. How many South American countries have an abundant water supply projected in 2025? So we've got to first of all find how many there are. We'll go to South America. We're looking for this colour here for abundant. We've got one country, two countries, three countries. So the answer is A. And then the second part of the question, what percentage of the 13 countries in mainland South America have a projected abundant water supply? So we know it's 3, so you just got to do the simple calculation of 13 divided by 3. And remember, you can have your calculator for each of the geography papers, and your answer should come out to 23.07%. 5.3. Describe the distribution of countries with an extreme risk of water scarcity shown in figure 12. So basically, 2 marks. Can we describe basically where the countries are found that have really, really low water scarcity? So if we look at the map, so we're looking for the ones in red. Just need to describe where they are. So for instance, you could say many of them are sort of next to each other in a line. You could say many of them are in Africa, particularly North Africa, around the Sahara Desert. You could maybe suggest that the vast majority of these countries are LICs or NEEs. So patterns like that, we need 2 of those at both marks. 5.4, outline one reason why some countries have an extreme risk of water scarcity. In other words, can we suggest why some countries don't have much water? Lots of potential answers, but you just got to try and have one point and develop it to get your full marks on this question. So you could say, particularly looking at the map, a lot of these countries are in the northern parts of Africa. So you could say some countries are particularly hot. So if there is any water, it'll be quickly evaporated. You could say that these countries are particularly dry and receive very, very little rainfall. Potentially you could develop that point and give a brief reason why that is. So around the tropic lines where the Sahara Desert is, air sinks, it descends is what we call it. This gives you a lot of high pressure. So if air sinks, it's unlikely to rain lots. Maybe you could say the geology, the rock of these countries can also play a role. Maybe the ground is permeable, so the water seeps through from the surface into the ground, so it's very hard to get to. Particularly in these African countries where if water is stored in the ground or in aquifers, you might not have the knowledge or the money to understand how to get the water from the ground to the surface easily. Final question 5.5, using an example from an LIC or NEE to explain how local strategies are being used to increase sustainable supplies of water. So it's the last question, it's the 6th marker. It's relatively straightforward. All we need to do is provide case study specific evidence from the Hitosa project in Ethiopia, and then try to explain in detail how they've managed to increase supplies of water, which are going to be sustainable. So not just good now, but last a long time into the future. So you could start off by setting the scene very briefly and say Hitosa is a very dry and arid part of Ethiopia, where previously people used to collect water from very shallow rivers, although these rivers often used to dry out in the summer. So what began in the 1990s is this very small local project financed by the global charity WaterAid and the United Kingdom. All it is a series of pipelines which collects water from high up in the mountains, the specific mountains in Ethiopia. It's called Mount Bada. It then doesn't require any power, so it's all based on the power and the force of gravity, allowing the water to trickle down these pipes where they can be collected from 100 water points from around the area. This has given 65,000 people around about 25 litres of water a day. I mean, that's fantastic for them, but also for farmers, there's some extra water pipes they can turn on to water their crops and to give to their animals. So as long as you can explain those in detail and appreciate that this is a fairly cheap to maintain project. If things do go wrong, again, this idea of the intermediate technology, it's something that the local people can easily fix without any or little training. Now, this question doesn't necessarily need any evaluation, but I always think it's good practice. So maybe just towards the end, maybe just a point to say, well, yes, this was a good project. People are a lot better. The water that they use isn't lots and lots, so it is going to be sustainable. However, some people have been misusing this taps, allowing their animals to drink from it, that sort of thing, and there wasn't any education around hygiene once these pipes were put in place. So it's definitely talk about and explain the actual strategy, but maybe a sentence at the bottom, just kind of a bit of evaluation.